Hello, in this session we will deal with the thermoregulation in human beings. You all know that homeothermic animals or the warm-blooded animals are those who are capable of regulating their internal body temperature. That is, their body temperature is maintained at a constant level, whatever the external temperature is. Okay, so how this temperature is maintained in a constant level, that is, we are dealing with in this session. The normal body temperature of an adult is about 98.6 degree Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. However, it can vary from 98 to 99 degree Fahrenheit or 36.6 to 37.2 degrees Celsius. And this temperature is recorded using a clinical thermometer by placing in different parts of the body such as mouth, axilla, rectum, over the skin, etc. The temperature that is recorded from the body surface is called shell temperature, and that which is recorded from inner body structures is called core temperature. This shell temperature is significantly less than the inner body temperature and is easily affected by environmental conditions. There are many factors which can influence our body temperature both physiologically as well as pathologically. The physiological variations include age, sex, diurnal variation, exercise, sleep, after meals, menstruation, etc. The pathological variation, an abnormal increase in temperature is called hypothermia, and a decrease in temperature is called as hypothermia. Usually when the temperature goes beyond 99 degree Fahrenheit or above 37.2 degrees Celsius, it is called a febrile or pyrexia state. And when it goes further beyond 107 degree Fahrenheit or 41.6 degrees Celsius, it is called hyperpyrexia. When the temperature goes below 95 degree Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius, it is called hypothermia. Okay. Regulation of body temperature depends upon the balance between heat preservation and heat dissipation. So that is how much heat is preserved in our body and how much heat is lost from our body. So disturbance in this balance will lead to abnormal body temperature. Heat preservation. Preservation of heat in the body depends on heat production in the body and heat gain from the environment. Now let's see the mechanisms of heat production. The heat production depends on basal metabolic activity, muscular activity, and non-shivering thermogenesis. So we will look into the basal metabolic activities first. The rate of basal metabolism is a major cause of heat production in the body. And we know that the food substrates are oxidized to produce energy. 1 gram of carbohydrate produces about 4.7 calories of energy, and 1 gram of protein gives 4.5 calories, and 1 gram of fat gives about 9 calories of energy. And this metabolic energy is utilized in transport of membrane pumps, chemical reactions, and muscular activities. However, most of this energy is converted into heat in the body, which is called as metabolic heat or heat of metabolism. And liver is the organ where maximum heat is produced due to metabolic activities. At rest, mainly the visceral organs contribute to this metabolic heat. But during physical exercise, 90% of the heat is produced by muscular activity. Now, muscular activity. Heat is produced in the muscle both at rest and during activities. At rest, heat is produced mainly by the muscle tone and also by the activity of respiratory muscles and cardiac muscles. We have already said that during exercise, 90% of the metabolic heat is contributed by the muscular activity. And the heat produced during the muscular activity is called as heat of activity, and majority of it is contributed by the skeletal muscles. On exposure to cold, there will be rapid involuntary contraction or twitching of the muscles known as shivering, which is a compensatory physiological mechanism in the body. And during shivering, skeletal muscle activity increases and enormous amount of heat is produced. And this is called shivering thermogenesis. Then comes the non-shivering thermogenesis. Certain hormones like thyroxine, adrenaline, etc. have an important role in it. They increase the body metabolism and contribute to the basal heat production. And this is called non-shivering thermogenesis. Another factor that adds to it is brown adipose tissue. You know that adipose tissue is a loose connective tissue that forms the storage site of fat. And they are of two types, white adipose tissue and brown adipose tissue. White adipose tissue is distributed throughout the body beneath the skin and surrounding the internal organs. The cells of white adipose tissue are unilocular, that is, they have only a single large vacuole in it. And the important functions are storage of energy, heat insulation, and protection of internal organs. Whereas a brown fatty tissue, it is distributed only in certain areas of the body, such as the back of neck and interscapular region. It is found to be abundant in infants, and after infancy, it disappears gradually and is formed of multilocular fat cells, that is, many small vacuoles with fat are present in it. Its brown color is because of large number of iron-rich mitochondria in it. And the function of brown adipose tissue is generation of heat by burning lipids than the storage of lipids. So we were discussing about the preservation of heat in the body, which depends on heat production in the body and heat gain from the environment. And we have seen the different mechanisms of heat production in the body. Now we will look on to the different mechanisms of heat gain from the environment. So if the environmental temperature is higher than the body temperature, our body will gain heat. And if environmental temperature is less than our body temperature, our body will lose heat. Okay. So heat gain from the environment occurs by three mechanisms: radiation, convection, and convection. It also occurs by means of ingestion and ventilation. So you all know what radiation is. It is the transfer of energy with the help of electromagnetic waves. So here the heat transfer by radiation occurs between the skin and solid bodies in the environment. For example, the radiant heat from a fire or from a radiant lamp provides warming to the bodies. Solar radiation is another example. And conduction. You know, conduction is the transfer of heat energy by direct contact. So when the body touches a solid material of different temperature, heat transfer occurs by means of conduction. For example, holding a glass containing hot water. Next is convection. It is the movement of heat by actual motion of matter, that is, transfer of heat into the body from a hot fluid or air. When our body is immersed in hot water, heat is conducted into the body. Next is ingestion and ventilation. By the ingestion of hot food and drinks, and also by breathing in hot air from the external environment, our body temperature may rise. Heat dissipation or heat loss. When the environmental temperature is less than the body temperature, heat will be lost from our body. And this occurs through skin, lungs, and excretory organs, which are called as cutaneous heat loss, pulmonary heat loss, and excretory heat loss, respectively. So, heat dissipation or heat loss. When environmental temperature is less than the body temperature, heat will be lost into the environment from our body. This occurs through skin, lungs, and excretory organs, which are called as cutaneous heat loss, pulmonary heat loss, and excretory heat loss, respectively. And maximum heat loss is through the skin. Cutaneous heat loss. From the skin, heat is dissipated into the atmosphere by four means: radiation, conduction, convection, and evaporation. We have discussed what these all are. Radiation. Here the heat transfer occurs from the body to other objects in the surroundings by electromagnetic radiation, and it occurs in conditions where the external temperature is much lesser, as in winters. In conduction, here the transfer of heat from the body occurs when the body touches a solid material of different temperature. For example, placing an ice pack over the body. Here, the heat loss occurs by means of conduction. And convection, when the body is exposed to a fluid or air with temperature different from the body, heat loss occurs by means of convection. Next is evaporation. The heat produced during the exercise is dissipated into the environment by means of evaporation. That is by evaporating sweat from the skin surface. And this rate of evaporation is dependent on the water vapor pressure gradient rather than the temperature gradient. And this evaporation occurs in two forms: sweating and perspiration. Sweating is the loss of heat from the body which we can sense by means of sweat. Whereas perspiration is the insensible water loss. Here, the diffusion of fluid occurs into the epidermal layer continuously. And here, water will be evaporated into the environment. But due to the absence of external sweating, we cannot identify this loss of water. So that is perspiration. Cutaneous heat loss. From the skin, heat is dissipated into the atmosphere by four means: radiation, conduction, convection, and evaporation. We have discussed what radiation, conduction, and convection are. So whenever the surrounding temperature is less, transfer of heat occurs from the body to other objects in the surrounding air by infrared electromagnetic radiation, which occurs in season of winter. Then in conduction, the transfer of heat from the body occurs when it touches a solid material of different temperature, like when an ice pack is placed over the body. Then in convection, heat transfer occurs when a body is exposed to a fluid or air with a different temperature from the body. Okay, when we are sitting in an air-conditioned room, etc. And now evaporation. Here, all the heat that is accumulated in the body during exercise is dissipated by evaporating sweat from the skin surface. And here the rate of evaporation is dependent on the water vapor pressure gradient rather than the temperature gradient. And there are two forms of evaporation. They are sweating and perspiration. The major difference is that we can sense sweating, whereas perspiration is an insensible water loss. The heat transfer that occur from the skin to the environment by means of sweating, and thus the heat loss occurring in our body, we can sense it because of the presence of sweat. Whereas what happens in perspiration is that there will be continuous diffusion of fluid from the body to the epidermis, and that will be evaporated from the body surface. But because of the absence of external sweating, we cannot identify this heat loss. So the insensible water loss that occur without sweating is called as perspiration. This is pulmonary heat loss. So the heat loss through the lungs occurs in three ways. They are evaporation of water in expired air, warming of inspired air, and panting. Panting is the rapid and shallow breathing through the mouth, which is typically seen in dogs. It's usually absent in human beings. Then the excretory heat loss. Any substance, whether it is fluid, semi-solid or solid, when it is lost from the body, it is warm. For example, the stool coming from the large intestine or the urine coming out of the urinary tract, these all are warm as they come out of the inner core of the body. So in this process of removal of excretory products, some amount of heat is lost from the body. This we can see that heat production in our body is because of the basal metabolism, muscular activity including shivering, then the non-shivering thermogenesis like thyroxine and epinephrine, brown adipose tissue, and the temperature effect on cells as radiation, conduction and convection. All these accounts to the generation of heat in our body. And the heat loss into the environment from our body is because of radiation, conduction, convection and evaporation. So when there is a balance between this heat production and heat loss, our body temperature will be maintained in its narrow normal range, and whenever there is a disturbance in this balance, it will lead to abnormal body temperature. Thermoregulation in human beings. Physiologically, this temperature regulation occurs by a feedback reflex system. So as in all the reflex systems, this thermal regulation too has a sensor, an afferent pathway, a center, an efferent pathway, and an effector organ. So these sensors are the thermoreceptors. So these are the heat sensitive neurons which are distributed over the skin and in the hypothalamus, specifically in the anterior hypothalamus. So these heat sensitive neurons or thermoreceptors are either cutaneous or hypothalamic. And so the afferent pathway carries these sensory information from these receptors to the brain, and the center being the hypothalamus, then the efferent pathway which forms a part of the autonomic nervous system, and an effector organ which either control the heat transfer or regulate the heat production in the body. Okay. So this is the feedback reflex system. So hypothalamus sets the normal range of body temperature, acting as the center of this feedback reflex system. And this hypothalamus center has two portions, that is a heat loss center and a heat gain center or a heat production center, in order to regulate the temperature of the body. So the hypothalamic centers for temperature regulation include heat loss center and heat gain center. The neurons that activate the hypothalamic centers for thermal regulation include heat loss center and heat gain center. The neurons that on activation induce loss of heat are located in the heat loss center, and the neurons on activation activate the mechanism that prevent loss of heat and produce internal heat are located in the heat gain center. Okay, so this heat loss center is situated in the preoptic nucleus of anterior hypothalamus. See, the hypothalamus is divided into anterior, middle and posterior portions, and this anterior portion is further divided into 5 nuclei, of which preoptic nucleus is one among them. So this heat loss center lies in the preoptic nucleus of the anterior hypothalamus, and the stimulation of this heat loss center causes vasodilation of the cutaneous blood vessels, increasing the blood flow and thus facilitating the sweating, thereby promoting the heat loss. Therefore, any lesion in this heat loss center will result in the abolition of this stimulation, causing hypothermia. And we have said that the thermal sensitive neurons called thermoreceptors are located in the anterior part of hypothalamus. Then the heat gain center. It is located in the posterior hypothalamic nucleus, and its stimulation causes shivering, which is the heat generating mechanism, and also it results in the constriction of the blood vessels in the skin, causing the reduction in sweating. Therefore, any lesion in the heat gain center will result in hypothermia. So, the heat loss center in the anterior hypothalamus sends messages to the effectors to cool the body down, and the heat gain center in the posterior hypothalamus initiates responses which help to warm up the body. Now, we will check the mechanism of temperature regulation. When the temperature of the body increases, the temperature of blood too increases. So, when this blood with higher temperature reaches the anterior hypothalamus, the thermoreceptors there in the heat loss center will be stimulated, and they try to bring the temperature back to normal by two mechanisms. That is, one by promoting the heat loss and the second by preventing the heat production. So either by promoting the heat loss and by preventing the heat production, the heat loss center tries to bring the increased temperature of the body back to normal condition. So the heat loss is promoted by inhibiting the sympathetic centers in the posterior hypothalamus. So what happens is, when these sympathetic centers are inhibited, there will be vasodilatation resulting in more and more blood flow. So this will eventually result in increased sweat secretion. So the heat loss is promoted by inhibiting the sympathetic centers in the posterior hypothalamus and increasing the sweat secretion. Next is the prevention of heat production. The mechanism of metabolic activities and shivering are inhibited in order to prevent the heat production. So the metabolic activities will be reduced, thereby reducing the heat production, and the muscular activity including shivering will be abolished or reduced, thereby preventing the heat production. So whenever there is a raise in the body temperature, the anterior hypothalamus or the heat loss center will try to bring it back to the normal range, either by promoting the heat loss or by preventing the heat production. The heat loss promotion is by increasing the sweat secretion or by inhibiting the sympathetic centers in the posterior hypothalamus, and the prevention of heat production is by inhibiting the metabolic activities and shivering. When the temperature of the body decreases, the blood temperature too decreases, and this blood with reduced temperature stimulates the posterior hypothalamic nuclei or the heat gain center, and this center tries to bring the reduced temperature back to the normal range by two mechanisms. That is, by preventing the heat loss and by promoting the heat production. The heat loss is prevented by stimulating the sympathetic centers of the posterior hypothalamic nuclei, thereby causing vasoconstriction, which reduces the blood flow and results in reduced sweat production. And this considerably reduces the heat loss. Next, the heat production is promoted by two ways, that is, by increased metabolic activities and by shivering. When the sympathetic centers are stimulated, adrenaline and noradrenaline secretions increases, and these hormones, particularly the adrenaline hormone, increases the metabolic activities, thereby increasing the heat production. Simultaneously, hypothalamus secretes thyrotropin releasing hormone that eventually results in increased thyroxine secretion from the thyroid. Thus, it accelerates the metabolic activities in the body and increases heat production. Next is shivering. When the temperature is low, the heat gain center stimulates the primary motor center for shivering, which is located in the posterior hypothalamus. And during shivering, enormous heat is produced because of these severe muscular contractions. Thus, the heat gain center helps in heat production by increasing the metabolic activities and by causing shivering. So, the heat loss is reduced and heat production is increased in order to bring the temperature back to the normal range by this heat gain center. So this is how the temperature of the human being is regulated with the help of the heat gain center and the heat loss center. To sum up the thermoregulation in human beings, when the body temperature is increased, it stimulates the anterior hypothalamus or the heat loss center, which inhibits the sympathetic activity of the posterior hypothalamic nuclei, that helps in reduced adrenaline secretion, thereby reducing the metabolic activities, and it also causes cutaneous vasodilatation, thereby causing increased sweat production. This increased sweat production will result in more heat loss, whereas the reduced metabolic activities along with the absence of shivering will result in less heat production. So more heat loss and less heat production will help to bring the increased temperature back to the normal range by the heat loss center. Now, when the body temperature is reduced, it stimulates the heat gain center or the posterior hypothalamus, which results in stimulating the primary motor center for shivering, situated in the posterior hypothalamus, and this shivering produces enormous amount of heat. It also increases the sympathetic activity by increasing the adrenaline secretion and thereby increasing the metabolic rate. It also causes cutaneous vasoconstriction, thereby reducing the sweat production. So this reduced sweat production causes reduction in the heat loss and increased metabolic activities along with the shivering increases heat production. So reduced heat loss and increased heat production helps to bring the reduced body temperature back to the normal level by the action of the heat gain center. So, this thermoregulation is yet another simple and easy to learn topic, and I thank you all for your patient listening. Stay connected while social distancing. Thank you.